Never fails to move me, songs like that, and there's quite a lot of them in the English-speaking tradition. Of course, some very well-known ones, very, very widespread in North America, Scandinavia, well, not even the English-speaking tradition on the continent of Europe, and ballads of infanticide, which again often are because a woman finds herself pregnant by her father's clerk, her father's ploughboy, and in her state of despair kills the child. So I just feel that in a way it's a way of witnessing it, and trying to find some imaginative way of communicating the history of women, of poor women, richer women. You know, certainly you could say richer women had more. No, they didn't have more control over their lives. Actually, they had less. Yeah. They may have had more dresses, more stuff. We know where that gets you. Yeah, but they didn't actually have more control over their lives than many of the poor women who had damn little enough, but weren't pawns in power, property kind of games in the way that women were. And I feel there's an enormous amount, although it was maidservants and ploughmen that would be singing those songs, there's enormous empathy somewhere inside many of those songs for the people they're singing about. So, and I realised, I think that was definitely one of the recordings where I felt her to be naive and innocent. I don't know if you felt that in her response to her dad, but as I say, both interpretations, perfectly valid, but just give a slightly different twist on the tragedy that unfolds. Something cheerful then. Because albeit clearly these songs developed, you know, in a very patriarchal culture in every sense, there are a remarkable number of songs, if you look for them, keep your ears and eyes open for them, that are actually about women getting the better of a situation. And the bite a bit, again, is the term that often gets used in folkloric circles, yeah. And sometimes for sure, like what are called the sirenic songs, like the women have powers to lure men by the enchantment of their voices or their song. And sometimes there would appear to be a degree of even something that might be called witchcraft or witchery, say enchantment in the way women will get the better of men. But sometimes it's sheer wordplay, sheer wit, sheer fun, as in this song, where it's really wordplay that she plays on to finish up getting the better of the patronising git who's propositioning her. So it's called The Crafty Maid's Policy. I've been singing it for years and dig it up from time to time and still think it's a delightful song. I think that's next on the list. If you look for them, there's a remarkable number of songs where women do turn the tables in kind of instances like that, which, yeah, I just have that sense that, you know, there's always been the transgressive element in folk song, if you look for it, of all sorts, but certainly when it comes to women defying the norms and the expectations. Oh, we'll move actually on to William Taylor. I didn't number them.
No, you
because
didn't.
and one of the things that we're discovering more and more about, so it would seem, I'm sure some of you know more about this than me, because not many of the relevant books turn up in talking books, and I'm reliant, I'm afraid, on audio books. I can't see to read print. And my Braille, it would take me from, well, I'd probably have dropped into my box by the time I'd read a whole book in Braille. It's so slow, and they don't, I mean, again, you'd have to, they don't exist. Like Bold in Her Breeches, which actually I do have, but I haven't had a chance to read it yet, Warrior Women in Popular Ballads. So that's my next, which I did get read for me. And because there are a remarkable number of instances of women who did actually dress up as sailors or soldiers. Some of them kept the disguise for their entire lives while in the army or the navy. And I don't know if you heard quite recently, and during the American Civil War, there were actually quite a lot of women who actually rode out with the soldiery, dressed as soldiers, but apparently with no attempt to actually disguise themselves. Their hair flowing. This was in one of Melvyn Bragg's Radio 4 programs, relatively recently. And that was something I hadn't known about, that, as I say, that women had been quite a number of them had joined, in fact, both sides. But certainly there's a lot of songs about women, some of them going off to seek their own true loves, who've been press ganged into the Navy or the Army. There's one song which I only have on vinyl, and that was just too difficult to try and translate onto, which I stopped singing because of its slightly kind of militaristic tone, called The Female Drummer, which some of you may have heard me sing over the decades. But I discovered quite recently that it's actually a true story. I'll just tell you the story very briefly. Young woman dresses as a soldier, doesn't get discovered. She says, while taking off my old red coat, I oft used to smile to think myself a female, yet a drummer all the while. Until she gets sent to the Tower of London, where another young woman falls in love with her and discovers she's a maid. At which she's betrayed. The woman goes and says, "Oi, this drummer boy isn't in the way you might have assumed him to be." And what is so interesting is she's then given a pension. She's giving an invalid pension. And sent out of the army, that's right. And so the last verse is what? "Fare thee well, my officer, you have been kind to me. Fare thee well, my comrades, you ne'er forgot shall be. And should the British Army fall short of any man, I'll put on my cap and feather and beat the drum again." And as I say, quite recently I heard a radio programme, which I'm very dependent on. This was in Australia, however. Interesting, isn't it? You have to go to Australia to find out about women in British tradition. But it was a fascinating interview with the woman who turned up there, and her name was Anne something, and I've forgotten the story on which the song was clearly based. However, and this apparently is said to have been a true story too. Who quite knows, because I haven't read Bold in Her Breeches or Warrior Women, but I hope to find out. Now, this is typical. The ballad is known as William Taylor. He appears in the first two verses, the last two verses, and it's Sarah Jane, sometimes she has another name, who does all the action in the course of the rest of the story. But of course the ballad was named after him. But you'll hear the fate he meets